Good evening. I'm happy to welcome you on Zoom and on LinkedIn streaming live to our event tonight. My name is Lukas Hofmann. I'm a trained product designer and now product manager at International Design Center Berlin. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth of our talent track sessions where we present outstanding projects from the new talent award category of the UX Design Awards 2021. We're offering behind the scenes looks at award-winning projects, a talent track project tonight, and we shine a spotlight on some of the most promising young experienced designers out there. Today we're here to shine that spotlight on our guest Frederic Myers. His team designed the award-winning project Aliado. It's a cooperative medical AI interface, a tool that shows the possible impact a smooth UX can have on a highly relevant field of life in medicine, cancer in particular. The awards are a global competition for excellent experience design, and relevance is an issue for us. The awards have been organized by the International Design Center Berlin since 2015. The IDC Berlin is a leading German nonprofit member-based institution based in Germany since 1968. So we're looking back to quite some history here. Our mission as IDC is to promote the value of design in business and society. And we do that in the field of UX design, in particular with our UX Design Awards since 2015. With this, we're raising recognition for UX design in general and show how good UX design can be responsible, integrative, and even empowering, creating opportunities for all. This is the goal of the awards, endorsing companies and individuals who submit designs that stand out, being especially innovative, that offer intuitive access to a good overall user experience and create satisfaction for the user. Besides labeling best practice out to the outside world of non-UX designers, we're also promoting great examples of UX across industries and fields. And the awards are not just a label, they're also meant as a platform striving to cultivate knowledge sharing and networking between UX professionals. The current status of the public choice, the UX Design Awards is our public choice award being under voting right now. It's on until the 28th of February. You can browse the nominated projects of this year, pick your favorites and push their chances of winning the Public Choice Award 2022. They've given their best, now you make it count. So that's our current effort, pushing the nominees nominated projects of this year. But let's get back to those who've already won the awards. So it's my pleasure to introduce Frederic Myers. He's one of the winners of the New Talent Award 2021, representing the minds and makers behind Aliado. His team members, Hannes Maurer, who's also the co-founder of their joint startup, as well as Sven Hornburg, Johanna Brandenburg, Michael Haselbeck, and Andre Schulze. And as I just mentioned, Frederic Myers and Hannes Maurer have co-founded Jerry, a young German service design and UX team with a focus on the medical sector, which kind of makes sense because that's, I guess, where they met over Aliado. I think we will have the link in the chat in a minute for Jerry, their startup. Frederic has a Bachelor of Arts in Product Design from Hochschule für Gestaltung Schwäbisch Gmünd. And as I read, he had an excursion to socioeconomic development at Tongji University in Shanghai. So yeah, he's come around a bit. And since 2019, he's working as a UX strategic designer at Porsche Strategic Design. That's 2019. And last year he submitted their project Aliado, which supports physicians and saves valuable time by structuring medical findings concisely and provides treatment suggestions and automates parts of the documentation of a cancer treatment process. That's very specific. I don't know that much about it, and I'm definitely sure that Frederic will explain much better than I will. So here he goes. Frederic, the stage is yours. If there are any questions within our audience, please step forward, switch on your camera and ask. or write it in the chat, and the chat questions will be ending up with me, and I'll hand them to our speaker. So go ahead, Frederic, you brought your presentation. Hit it.
Thank you very much, Lucas, first and foremost for the introduction. That's very kind. And also thank you to all the UX award team for inviting us today for this talk. We're really excited. And without further ado, let me jump right into the presentation. So I hope everyone can see now something. And yeah, so let me dive in. Before, let me give you a quick overview of what I want to cover today about this project. So first of all, I want to share a bit about how actually this whole project came to be, because there's some story behind that. And we also had a quite interesting research phase, which led to a very exciting turning point within our project. And finally, of course, I want to share with you the final concept, what we actually created. Okay, so let's start. First of all, the project launch. How did everything come to be? So as Lucas already mentioned, we're a team of 3 bachelor students, Hannes and Sven, who are also part of the team. And we are all students, or we're students, better to say, at the University of Applied Sciences in Schwäbisch Gmünd, which is down in the southern part of Germany. And you can see one of the beautiful interior rooms of our university hall. And we were quite interested already during our studies with the field of medicine. So one thing we actually decided is during our bachelor's is to go and search for a project that we could do within the medical industry. And we were very fortunate to partner up with the University Clinic in Heidelberg, which of course is also world renowned for their cancer treatment. But before we actually went into the project and sought out what to design, we first wanted to talk to people to get a better understanding of how the whole sector actually works. And we did that by basically doing a lot of expert interviews. And first of all, we looked at clinics, and we looked at also different people, or talked to different people from different backgrounds. So on the one side, we had, for example, surgical oncologists. We also talked to people from the management staff, or even a clinical directory, radiologists, and medical suppliers. And of course, the clinic is only one small or bigger part within the healthcare system. So what we actually did is we also looked at the whole environment of all the different kind of players that take a part in the medical system in Germany. And you can see here, what we wanted to do is basically attach the field of influence that's more to the bottom. So the more we go to the bottom of the graphic, the more there would be potential for us as designers to have an impact. Because of course, the higher we go, the influence is going to come less and less rare, because we don't want to play at a political or even a legal level. That was not our field. And what we did through those interviews is basically look for pain points, and also then afterwards to see whether or not they have some kind of correlation, right? Because sometimes they might be connected. And the end result of this looked something like this. So this is our final on the wall posted diagram of the environment model with a lot of post-its. We love post-its during our design work. And you can see all the red post-its are basically the pain points that we later on then try to connect with the different players to see whether or not there is some potential area on which we could work at. Finally, though, we decided on one of the most interesting fields to work on or focus on, and that would be the relationship between physicians and cancer patients, just because it's such a rich environment, and we really wanted to dive in more deep on what this kind of experience had to offer us if we would design something for the surgeon and the cancer patient. So the next step, every good project starts with research, right? So that's exactly what we did. And we had 3 major fields or areas where we did research in. So the first area in which we did interviews are more expert interviews. We talked even to more people. We also had some observations within the hospital and clinics themselves. And finally, we did a lot of research on literature, and I cannot extend that enough. We did a lot. So to give you an overview on that, we split up our research again in the literature field in 3 main areas. One would be artificial intelligence, the medical sector, and psychology. And those were just the areas that we chose because we thought those would be the most bang for the buck, so to say, the most potential ones. And we tried to connect them together and see what we could gain out of them. And you can see a checklist of all the things that we actually wanted to read through. And it was really a deep rabbit hole that we went into, because every book that we started reading just fascinated us so much from a topic point of perspective that we just dove deeper and deeper into the research. And to be completely honest with you, that was one of our first learnings. That definitely took us way too long. So at the end, I think retrospectively saying this, in my humble opinion, we should have started at a later stage within the project to do that kind of in-depth research in literature, because later on in the project, we knew more specifically what we actually wanted to solve and what kind of areas we wanted to, basically work with. And this made it way harder for us doing it as we did it, to first do the research and really dive into the literature. This was great for giving a general understanding of the topics, but it also used up a lot of time. So that was definitely one big learning for us. But one of the really key essential things in our research was the user research, or observations that we did really in the clinic, going into the university clinics and hospitals and basically looking over the shoulders from surgeons. And we were very fortunate because we could really experience everything short of doing the surgery ourselves. We didn't get to do that, but they even offered us to teach a bit how to handle the equipment. And we were very fortunate to really gain such an in-depth understanding from, of course, such a complex field. And we could be basically almost at every stage of their day-to-day workflow. We could see how they would prepare, how they would talk with patients, and of course, we could actually go into surgery. And I can just highly recommend from our experience, that is one of the best things we have done in this project, is to actually see and feel also how those surgeons work and what kind of challenges they face day to day, because that really made us understand with what kind of field and what kind of complexity we're dealing here with in this project. And then finally, from all this research that we did, we had a synthesis. And we were very fortunate to do this with some medical students from the university hospital, as mentioned before. And we basically took all that research and tried to make sense with it together. So we sat down and created different kind of workflows and processes. And here are the three main results basically we got from our research. First, we got some cause and effect diagrams, which were quite helpful for us to sort of see how different kind of pain points would relate to one and each other, and to see how maybe there is a root problem for a multitude of other problems. We also had some process diagrams, which would maybe show us a day in the life of a surgeon or a day in the life of a surgical assistant, to better understand the field in which we're working with. And last but not least, we also had a lot of ideas and concepts, initial concepts, so to speak, where we just try to use our creativity to then use all that knowledge that we had to already develop some solutions. And again, here we had a very major learning point, because a lot of our ideas ended up in the trash. We had to discard many concepts and initial thoughts just because they weren't practical or because they didn't hit the real points. And I can remember, so this was around the New Year to December. And we were really struggling to find out what do we actually want to build. And this was probably in part of many things, maybe just too much information. And even our professors were saying, hey, you usually do such a good job. Why is everything so lacking? And that was just, a very frustrating point for us. But luckily, we had a turning point. We had a true awakening moment, so to say. And that turning point came when we finally looked closer at the relationship that surgeons or physicians and their respective patients share. What do I mean by that? So if we first look at the patient, and if we wanted to design something for a patient, we found out that we can't design something for a patient that's only for a day or so. We really had to design something that supports the patient from beginning to the end of their treatment. So literally from the beginning, when they first go into the hospital to when they get their diagnosis, all the way up to the end of the therapy when they're recovering. And of course, here we're speaking about a couple of months, not only days or hours. And as you can imagine, finding out that you have cancer is just a life-shocking moment. And what we discovered when we talk to patients is that it's really an emotional roller coaster that they're going through. When you first find out that you have cancer, and then if you slowly have to recover, that's just a lot of strain, not only on yourself as a patient, but also your family and any kind of relatives or friends. So we knew we definitely wanted to, if we design something for a patient, work on that field. Now, this is, of course, completely different if we look at the surgeon. Here, we're not looking at a couple of months, which we wanted to design for. Basically, the customer journey for the surgeon would be 24 hours. It would be a normal, regular working day. And as with every working day, you have things that work better, that break you, and things that accelerate you. And we try to find out what are the things that truly break the surgeon or basically take out speed from his day-to-day workflows. And that is the huge difference. And we only found that out when we actually put the patient and the surgeon side by side, comparing them and giving them a name. So what we found out for the patient is that it's more or less an emotional world that they're in. When you get cancer, every patient treats this very individually, and it was astounding for us to find out how differently they would react to that answer. Some of the patients were really enthusiastic in a sense of they were beating it. They were really optimistic. They were doing their best to fight it. And even though shortly before surgery, they know already they wanted to plan their next vacation with their son. And other patients, of course, they just broke down and had strong depressions even to sometimes. So the world of the patient is an emotional world in which we had to design for him. While on the other hand side, for the surgeon, it's a world of information, having the right information at the right time to find the best possible treatment for the patients. And now for you as an audience, this might be quite obvious. Retrospectively, for us, of course, it was as well, but it really took us a while. And I think really giving a name for this emotional world and informational world really helped us to not understand, but also to accelerate our own development much, much faster, because we finally knew what we wanted to do. And since we knew what we wanted to do, we could finally create paper wireframes and create concepts that we iterated together with surgeons in multiple co-creation sessions. And then again, we were very fortunate here to work with actual surgeons that could literally point to certain concepts that they liked, certain aspects that they didn't like. And before we took those paper wireframes to a more serious stage, we could really just develop them and iterate them as much and as often as possible. And then as more and more the prototype got concrete, we also had multiple meetings with the medical students and also real-life surgeons to really fill the prototype with realistic information, with data and real patient pictures, where if experts would look at our prototype and they would see certain data, they would know it does make sense and it's not just some thought up experiment, sort of to say, from us as design students. And that also really helped us that we were working again here with the university hospital, because they had one of the more modern surgical rooms right now on the market, even in Europe. And that's why we could even test our interfaces in the surgery room where our concept would actually work at the end. And this was, of course, quite great, because as a designer, there's literally no better playing ground for that than actually going out in the real world and testing it. And then finally, what we came up with is Aliado. And Aliado comes from the Portuguese words, or is a Portuguese word, and means ally. And that's exactly what we wanted to view Aliado as, a companion, an ally that works with a surgeon through his day-to-day challenges. And now let me show you how our final concept Aliado actually looked like. So the first area we wanted to design for is the diagnosis stage for a surgeon. And by the way, I'm only focusing on the surgeon right here because that was the main project. We also had solutions for the patient, but we wanted to focus on the surgeon. So during the diagnosis stage, this is where the surgeon sits down for the first time with their patient and tries to find out as much information as possible to give basically the tumor and the disease a name. And this can be very patient individualistic. Every patient is different and every tumor is as well. And that is one of the challenges that they face, because they have to go through enormous amounts of information, sometimes up to 70 pages of medical findings per day, to find the right treatment procedure. Now, on top of that, if that weren't easy enough, every 5 minutes that they spend with a patient can result in 20 minutes of documentation workload. And you can imagine if you have 5 to 15 patients a day, which can be quite usual, that is just a lot of extra work. And that was definitely a challenge, how Aliado can help in the diagnosis phase for surgeons. So how would it actually work? Once the surgeon sits down, he can actually have all his patient information in a patient findings library. And when new information comes up, he can scan that information, and Aliado basically gives him a curated list that he can then select or curate and help the Aliado learn while he saves a lot of time. And then later on, Aliado can use exactly that same database, that information that was gathered, to create automatic reports for the documentation, as you can see here, with a click of a button. So this is, of course, a huge time saver, and it helps Aliado and other AI infrastructures to gain more knowledge within the field of medical, in the medical space, because when you work with AI, one of the key things is data. So we first had to lay the groundwork to even have data flowing to Aliado. The second important stage of our design was the tumor boards. And the tumor board is a very interesting meeting we found out about. So this is where surgeons sit together with other colleagues and other experience fields or expertise fields and trying to find the best possible treatment for their patients. And they're from different varying backgrounds, and it's really about working together to see and to digest what kind of information they have. So one of our clear challenges was to display complex information quite easily, to basically give an overview of the patient. And on top of that, we also had to find a way in which we could help in the supporting while supporting the decision-making process. We had to give them some kind of guidance so they could even make better decisions in the future. So when surgeons meet together within the tumor boards and they want to see more information with Aliado, they get this patient at a glance where all the information is stored in this information widgets. And when surgeons just want more information, they just open it. And right here, you can see one of the hard pieces of Aliado, decision supports. Each of those widgets represents a different kind of treatment that Aliado suggests to the surgeons. And if they want to know more about that treatment, all they have to do is click on it and they get a different kind of result. Now, this might be quite cryptic, of course, for us as non-medical people, perhaps. But what it actually did is explain it. So Aliado explained its reasoning behind that specific treatment that it offered. And this is quite crucial because every surgeon needs to understand, why did Aliado, or any AI in that case, give me that treatment suggestion or any kind of suggestion? Because that's what the same thing they would do with other, medical assistants. And that's why it was crucial for us to design also something like this in the interface, so surgeons can later on have transparency when it comes to the decision support. The last and final most crucial stage that we wanted to develop for is the surgery itself. It's here where everything comes together, and the right information at the right time can mean the difference sometimes between life or death. And it is here where we have to provide essential information on time. So when surgeons want to see some certain pictures or gain new knowledge or look at a certain parameter, they have to be able to look at it spontaneously and instantaneously. As well, one of the challenges was that it is, of course, an ever-changing environment. The surgery is never, there is a plan, there are certain standard procedures, but you never know what's going to come up. And that's why we had to work with a very complex environment within the surgery room itself. So when surgeons first step into the surgery room, it's sometimes that they remember a patient that they had in the past. And we wanted to utilize that. So if they wanted to compare a patient that they had right now, they could do that by pulling up a list that you can see right here of other patients and choosing one patient that they could compare him to with. And this was helpful to see how the outcome of a past patient was, and basically to utilize their knowledge and the knowledge of their collective surgeons. When new information like a new lesion comes up, you have an input system that allows Aliado to adapt the decision support. And this was, of course, really easy to design for the University Hospital in Heidelberg because they had a lot of nice, really cool digital interfaces within surgery. But of course, if we would look at other clinics, that might be more challenging. So that would be an interesting field for our project to further see how we could utilize this technology also in different clinics. So to sum it all up, Aliado works in 3 key stages of the treatment procedures for surgeons. It helps in the diagnosis through creating data sheets and through saving time for the documentation. It enables other surgeons and their colleagues to, in the tumor board, view a patient at a glance and gain basic support in their decision through a decision support, and transparency through having that decision support being explained to them. And during the surgery, Aliado supports them with on-the-fly and on-demand data, while as well showing them all the necessary information that they need. And of course, all this project wouldn't have been possible with the great help of many other people besides me here today. And that's why I want to give a quick thanks to the whole team from the University Hospital in Heidelberg, as well to my colleagues, Sven and Hannes, who are also here with us today. And yeah, that was just a great experience for us. And it was really one of the key moments for us to see how great it can be to work in an interdisciplinary team where you have different kind of backgrounds, where you have medical students, you have surgeons, and you have designers. And to work in such a broad but also exciting field was just a huge, exciting experience for us. And finally, if you are curious about further projects, I would just quickly like to introduce our company, Jerry, which we founded when we were still studying in our student times. And we have been fortunate enough to work on multiple challenges, not only in the medical sector. And we love to dive into basically any challenge that you have for us. We really like to understand the user more, to take complex fields like the medical sector and see how with design we can help the user and utilize design, so to say, for its best. And with that, I'm very excited to stay in touch with you and open for your questions.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. The chat is free for your questions now. Frederic, please. Yeah, okay, perfect. Back on full screen. Nice. Yeah, if anybody has questions, please step forward. So long, I have 2. The first one is because you already mentioned that in Heidelberg, it's ideal conditions for this testing situation and so on. And I was wondering, the last time I was to a hospital, I've seen a lot of clipboards. It's you know, they're not quite that far. What do you think? How long will we have to wait in Germany until Aliado can be applied in every clinic? Do you have a vague forecast how long this might take for the clinics to be up to it? I mean,
of course. Yeah, so that's a very complex question in itself, probably. I'm not sure if I can answer every aspect of it, but I think one of the major parts, as you mentioned correctly, we were really fortunate to work with the University Hospital in Heidelberg, and especially their facilities, we found out, were the newest ones in all of Europe. So this building was literally constructed just a few weeks ago, or finished a few weeks ago when we first stepped in. So we literally got to work on the edge of technology, what it would have to offer. So this is, of course, a dream for a designer, but can be a nightmare for an entrepreneur as you try to adapt that technology to older hospitals. And sort of what we found out from earlier projects is that that field can vary quite largely. So luckily, I was able also to visit a hospital in Karlsruhe, where my aunt works as also a surgeon in the field of gynecology. And what was exciting to find out there is, of course, that they still work with Post-it sometimes. They also have software, but the workflow is really, really different. So one thing we, like you said correctly, found out is that probably Aliado right now in its stage wouldn't be a broad-based approach as of this moment. But one of the things that we also saw is that, or that we found out, is that more and more those clinical centers are growing bigger because most of the patients don't rely anymore onto the smaller hospitals because the lack of expertise. So they move on to larger, usually in Germany, university clinics, to go to basically where their expertise lies. And this would be definitely a help in the trends and generally to bring more patients or to have more patients in those university hospitals, because that of course would be great for software like this. And also what we did find out a bit on the side is that there are some interesting markets for that as well. For example, America is way more on the frontier, let's say, what digital appliances have to offer in the medical sector. So that would also be something that we would further look at, and probably where we would see more novel approaches. But one of the great things that we found out is that there is a lot of research already done in the project, also within the clinics, and we're really hopeful that Aliado or a similar software can become reality in not too distant future.
I think that would help a lot of people to get faster and more humane decision making in hospitals, and take a bit more time to, I find it interesting that this app, it doesn't really, I don't know how far you went with the emotional, how did you call it? Sorry, the emotional journey? No, the patient side, how did you call it?
Like emotional worlds, yes.
Emotional world, okay. I don't know how you far went there, but I was thinking when you said that you did the informational world quite intensively, or to the very core, I guess that this leaves the medics themselves a lot of time to cover the emotional world, which is maybe even the best approach, because they still have contact with the patient, and I guess nobody can take that from them kind of, and it would help a lot to have more than just 5 minutes if you don't have to do that much documentation. So that's really, it's a nice approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and you're mentioning a really interesting point, because one thing that at least me personally, or that personally astounded me, was how different patients can be. And of course, this is something quite obvious if you think about it, but really experiencing it is a completely different thing. So when I was sitting down with surgeons, I was just in the background in a room and watching over their shoulders as they were talking to patients. You literally had everything from patients that were crying in tears and really couldn't grasp anything, to also patients that were, I would say, like the typical educated patient. They had all their documents ready. They had really good questions for the surgeons. And you could really see how the surgeon, or the physician in this case, really also had to be really adaptive in a social kind of way. So giving them more time to spend with the patient is really an essential, because that as well is something that is challenging for them. And plainly, I think you can't have any simple digital solution for that. It's just basic communication, talking with the patient, going through their pain as well, but trying to find the right treatment and the right approach for them. That is so challenging and demanding, of course, as well. So giving them more time for that, that would be amazing, definitely.
That's great stuff, yeah. I was also thinking, I imagined that from the development of a patient's record, or the last patient, you can get an idea how to proceed with that patient or the next patient. On that individual level, but on a broader level, I was thinking that if you have a number of cases with that kind of documentation, you can probably even derive a different treatment strategy on a broader level for that kind of cancer or something like this. So did you think of an interface for deep learning? Was that a topic in the project?
So I think I have to be honest, I wasn't too much in the field of AI. That was more Hannes's topic, although I, of course, also worked on the interface as well. And I think one really deep learning approach, if you could say it's, or random forestry approach that we looked at more closely, was with the similar patients that you could see during the surgery phase. So this was when you could pull up a list of different surgeons and, sorry, not surgeons, but patients, and compare them to one and each other. And we found that as a really interesting thing, because what it would basically allow surgeons to do is to give them an experience that they couldn't utilize before. So we had that multiple times where surgeons said, sometimes I remembered a patient by just looking at their CT or MRI scans, but I couldn't really remember or put together the whole case. And of course, with technology like AI and deep learning, especially in that phase, we could really help him to streamline and bring together all those important cases. But we have Hannes also, I see, in here with us.
Microphone's on.
Yeah, maybe you can add something to that.
Yeah, like this was kind of also the big challenge, that deep learning and all these like, you know, neural nets, are pretty like much like black boxes. I mean, we also talked with a data scientist. I think this was actually also one of the aha moments and challenges, because we figured out, oh, actually what they want, like the surgeons want us to do, is not realistic without taking like, you know, care of how we get the data. I think this was also some crucial moment. But yeah, anyways, so we kind of more took this approach that we let the AI, like that the surgeon is helping the AI at first, and then the AI is increasingly trying to get it solved on his own for some things, like, you know, take up all the busy work. For example, the medical findings, we first thought the AI will just analyze it and we'll find out what they mean, but it's totally impossible, because the big problem with AI in the medical sector was that every doctor, you know, is writing his report in a different way. So AI will just get caught up in these small like differences and will find things that, you know, a normal human will not find, because they understand the language. So like this general thing, like understanding the essence of something that you mean, that is a really big challenge for AI. So what we instead did is we kind of let AI explore the parameters and the numbers in the findings. So in the end, you turn this finding, which is like a long text, into a chart with numbers, and that actually is readable by AI. And now the AI simply can compare, you know, how similar are the different patient you know, logs, the different charts of each patient, and can just display the similarities. And out of this, then you can teach a neural net on how to how, you know, but this is far out in the future. But already, I think this first step to structure medical reports is a big one, and it will enable somehow this data basis or foundation for AI to learn on. So like that is the current factor. Like currently, we just lack the data that is readable by AI, and that's the problem. And what we did with Aliado is also like, I think one of the big things there on the doctor side was just to make to help the doctor with a program make this more readable for himself and for the AI. So like that he can actually search through his patient data for certain parameters, because currently that is not working. Currently, they just have like a desktop with a folder and there's a lot of documents, but they're kind of dumb, you know, it's kind of just like a digital report, but it's not a digitalized report. That's kind of the thing.
I'm getting two questions, actually three questions that hit different spots. It's like about the image recognition, and also, okay, and I also see that Dr. Raucholz seems to have a question. If that's still the case, please click on your microphone and show yourself. Hi.
Yes, I can't get my camera to work, so sorry, you can only hear me. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm very proud of what Frederic was doing here with this project, because working in a hospital myself in Germany, I just wanted to say again that sadly, most of our hospitals are not as digitalized as we should be. As we've seen now with COVID, also in the epidemic, how behind more or less Germany is. And sadly, we have so much paperwork and documentation, which is done repeatedly and repeatedly. And in my gynae oncology, we also have a cancer center. So doctors are constantly busy with documentation, and just seeing the possibilities that you have with this program. Also to be able to save time, because we want to spend actually more time with patients, but because of all the documentation, this is often very difficult. Yeah. And being able to collect all of the data or the digital data of a patient in one thing would really ease medical life as well as during operations. So I'm quite excited about this project and the potential it has, even in Germany. And so in Germany, most cancer patients are always in cancer centers, and it can be university hospitals, but there are also a lot of smaller hospitals or bigger hospitals that also have cancer centers. And I think this would be very interesting in these hospitals to be able to use the data and the information that we would get from this whole system. Thank you.
And
thanks,
maybe if I may add something to that, thank you very much, Frau Raucholz, for adding that. I think also one aspect that Hannes mentioned that was also really interesting when we were working is that getting medical data is really challenging, even more challenging than other kinds of data. Why is that? Because at the end of the day, you have to have some kind of surgeon or some kind of expert or physician who has to validate that this data or the outputs, whatever the AI gives, is correct. And that was also, I think, something that was quite interesting for us to see, is that that data is even more expensive in that sense, because you have to have an expert that looks over it and validates it. And we were quite fascinated also to see how projects like that could work within a clinical setting. So that's also a really interesting aspect.
I have plenty more questions coming in, and one more from my side on the aspect of qualified or qualifying data. I was wondering, laying your life into the hands of a surgeon is a challenge for people in the first place. But for the patient as well as for the surgeon, I was wondering, laying your hands or your decisions is in the hand, your actions relying on AI, basically. It's another challenge. It's like, you really have to trust AI. How can you be sure to trust AI? I mean, the data is validated by surgeons, but what ensures them back that they can actually not just make sense of it visually, but also rely on the data itself? How did you approach this? Did you take this into account?
So I think from one of the lead surgeons, we got actually a really good explanation of how we can imagine this to be. So imagine you're driving down the road with your GPS or navigational system, and you know from experience that going the way straight is always the way to go, but for some reason your navigational system points that you should take the exit. What do you do? And that's exactly how we think Aliado should also be viewed. It's only a suggestion at the end of the day. The responsibility in the beginning still solely lies with the surgeons, and it's there to assist them. And that would be something interesting to see, because there we're going into a very exciting field of human AI cooperation, or true cooperation, because basically the surgeon has to evaluate, do I take basically the counterintuitive approach from the AI, or do I take my own approach from experience? And it could happen that the approach that AI offers is the one that works in the end, and his own approach doesn't work, and he could learn from that. And that would be something really interesting from a cooperative perspective, and of course is viewed as highly critical in the medical industry. That's why, of course, every kind of clinical product undergoes an immense process to even be regulated, to be on the market, or validated to be on the market. And I think that would be something really interesting. So, but to sum it all up, I think it's definitely still in the hands of the surgeons to decide, and it's just a decision support. It's not the AI saying do this. It's, I'm supporting you with that. Would you like to take it or not? And then they can evaluate that.
Yeah, as a surgeon, I would agree with that it's a decision support, and because you will still continue to think on your own as a surgeon and use the information from the AI to help assist you in your decision making.
All right.
Now I want a stamp approved by doctors.
That just sounded like one. So we have more concerning where the data comes from, which you already there. Akurov out of network. Sorry, it's from IDC Berlin, head of strategy, Akurov. He's asking if AI image recognition is involved or should be involved, or is it more a form-based user interface? What's the plan there?
Maybe Hannes, do you want to answer that question? Otherwise, I can also go ahead. Want to leave also the space for the colleagues?
You can go ahead for now.
Sure. So also an interesting question, of course. So there were two things we learned here. The one is that there is already a lot of things happening within the field of radiology, because there are a lot of images lying around. So there is actually already a lot happening with imagery in hospitals, or based on image recognition. So during our project, we actually found out that's maybe not also the most interesting part, because there's already a lot of things happening. And one thing we did look more closely also, there was a second learning, the most valuable data would be, of course, in the surgery itself. So this would be through minimal invasive surgeries, where you basically have tubes that are inserted into the body, and you don't have to cut open bigger parts, and you can then gain visual data through this. And this is definitely an interesting field where there were also already a lot of projects lying around, but we didn't really solely focus on that during our project. So the short answer would be no, we didn't have any image recognition involved, but it's definitely also a very exciting field. And on a side note to that, right now we're actually with Jerry working with the University Hospital in Heidelberg on a project where we actually use imagery data to create AI concepts. So basically you could say it is in the making right now.
Yeah, sounds like it. Okay, nice. I have more. Wait, there's a question. Yeah, well, that's actually kind of answered. Aka also asks if this extremely complex product, and it's really been a long way, also with medics involved. So it's been really not just intense, but really valid. The question was if it's been developed further, and the answer is yes. And what are your next steps on this? Where's Jerry going right now?
So right now we're trying to find out whether or not Aliado can also work with different kind of surgeries. When we developed Aliado, we were looking at HCC, which is basically a tumor within the liver or liver cancer. And of course, you have many other different types of cancer, and you usually can't always compare that. There are different metrics, different information that is needed for different kind of surgeries. And within the project that we're doing right now, for example, we're looking at the esophagus resection, which is basically the resection of the esophagus if you have esophageal cancer. And within that, there are a huge range of new and other functions we discover would be equally as interesting and valid to put into a product like Aliado. So we're basically trying to evaluate which of those features would be helpful. And there is still an ongoing evaluation from surgeons regarding this tool. And hopefully within the next year or so, we will even have a paper written on it to see more in detail what the actual experts think of AI applications like that. But as Hannes said, it's still a bit a long road to create in reality. And if you would ask me personally, I think that would be the optimal point to start a startup with it. But we'll have to see if when the right time for that is to come.
Mm-hmm. All right, but you're on the way. I have another question from Elisabeth Alfholz asking two questions actually. How will this program cater to intuitively or systematically learn? Sorry, how to use this? What's program cater to intuitively? Yeah. So like, what's the Anlernprozess? How do users get to learn it? That's how I get it. And the second, I'll just add the second question because it's one block. Do hospital systems want doctors to have more time with patients, or how would this tool be a reason to shrink the time with patients for generating more income with a higher flow coming in and out of hospitals?
That's a good one.
Yeah, Hannes, do you want to touch it?
Yeah, like, I mean, the last one, I think I could touch, because that's always, I think, something, especially where you as a designer are at the forefront of the like problem or thing, like you try to make people's life easier because of, I guess, choices that the economies did, like, now you have more tools, so we can expect more from you. I guess this is somehow a problem which you have always with progress in general. Like, it will always be, somehow uncomfortable, or things will change. But I think there's this book, I don't know how it's called, but where people always say, like, which proves people wrong, that today everything is worse than before, like that today actually things are the best. And I think this is it's just this phenomenon, when people think, now we have richer people than ever, but actually also the people that are poor, they get less and less actually now, because we're having real progress on a lot of scale. So I think this is a similar thing, but I mean, me as a designer, I would I prefer that the surgeon had more time with the patient. But what I think instead might happen is maybe the treatment will be faster, but I think also the quality will rise. Like, I think this tool will at least make sure that the quality is not, you know, quality is not reduced due to the speed that we have already. But it's a good one, and it's a controversial one for all things automation, I guess. Yeah.
And if I may add something to that, by the way, the book I think you were talking about is from Hans Rohling, Factfulness, right? Which is a really, really good book. I can highly recommend it to everyone. It's a very, very good read. But it's a great point that Hannes touches on, because I think with a lot of technologies, you don't actually know how they're being deployed. You just have to find out and see how they actually develop. So one example that comes to my mind is probably even YouTube, I don't know, or Twitch. Like Twitch started off as a streaming platform for a real life TV reality show. And the only function that stayed the same was the live comment feed. And now it's, you know, a streaming platform for gamers out there. So the founders you originally envisioned a completely different use case, and now it's being deployed in an equally different kind of way. So as Hannes said, the wishes are big, of course, to use it for a real, a time saver for surgeons to spend more time with the patients. But I think that's a generally interesting question for technology in general, because we have a lot of time-saving technology, but do we all feel that we have more time? And I would say the answer mostly to that is no, because we can even fit, it's great, we can fit in more work into the little time we have. And that's a bigger social construction issue even then.
Yeah, I think also we have to ask ourselves how long, like how quick will it still go, you know, because I think we reached the level of quickness where sometimes you just, it's not the problem anymore that you take a long time for doing it, because things get so quick that it's more the time for your brain to adjust to the new task all the time. And I think this is like a limit we cannot skip on. So yeah.
I think we didn't answer the first question.
Yeah.
And there's another one even. The first one was, how is this program, I guess the application catered to intuitively or systematically learn how to use this? What's the onboarding, let's say?
I mean, technically, or from the user experience perspective?
From the user perspective. I would suppose the user perspective.
Specified, but I guess,
yeah, I guess the first one we couldn't answer technically.
Yeah, I think so. What we try to do is use some kind of logic that you already have with more complex software, and there are some basics that you can learn when it comes to, or that even I learned anew from designing complex software. It's things like and that's not easy to answer question, because expert software is always to some extent needs to be learned or understood before using it. Of course, we try to design it as usable, efficient as possible, but you never know until you actually test it out there in the real world. And I think one thing that really stuck with me is that you have to realize when doctors are working, it's not like, or initially I thought a lot of times they're working on one patient, then they have time to write everything down, and then they go to the next patient, like step-by-step process. And that's definitely not reality. Sometimes they get so many calls, like they have telephones with them, that they're continuously distracted by the work that they're doing, even during surgery. And this is something that really has to be handled by expert software like Aliado, that offers the opportunity that no matter where they started and where they left off with the application, that they can still always come back to the moment or instance that they were working on. So we did think of things like that while designing the software, but it was definitely, I think it would definitely be a complete bigger and utter challenge to actually implement it in the real world. You just cannot do that without extensive user testing, I think. Or what do you have anything to add, Hannes?
Yeah, like I would say from the intuitive, like from the perspective of onboarding, we researched quite deeply into the clinical processes, because we knew, like, when we want them to, help the AI get smarter, it's an added workload. So how could we merge this optimally with the workflow so that it actually reduces the time? And so we tried, to think how are they typically working. And when patients are coming in, they read through the findings that they bring with them briefly before, And the idea that we basically had is just that the secretary that is just giving these findings to the doctor, she will now instead scan it in, and he will just look at it on the Aliado program, because it's basically also just a viewer where he can view these findings. But on the same time, then the AI will already start also highlighting things, and he can do this, you know, when he prepares, he can along the way correct things that it finds or not. He doesn't even have to add things, because it will just already learn based on this one, I would say, because if he adds things, that's also something which I don't think that they will adopt, because it just is added work. But at least they would sort through the suggestions. I don't know if you showed this, Frederic, but like the screens where the AI finds things, you can just say, yeah, that's true, or no, that's wrong. And yeah, that's basically how the system should learn.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
I think one. Sorry,
Please.
go ahead. Yeah, one more thing that also came to my mind is, I think it really depends also on the future generations of surgeons that are about to come when it comes to things like onboarding or understanding complex software like that, because they have so much different demands. I remember we had one interview with a more senior surgeon, and he was complaining about the new icons that come up all the time. And I think, of course, for younger people like us, that's like quite normal, that we are used to new technology. We're used to infrastructures because we're more native or digital natives in that sense. So I think that's also something to be considered, that the current surgeons, of course, still have maybe not too much digital mindset, although we saw both ways. I mean, we also work with surgeons that use Slack, that really want to work with new technologies. And I think that's also a major factor when it comes to implementing more software like that. And probably they also have higher demands. Like they really want, you know, a mobile application as well. They want to have the possibility to share things and have a really good user experience. So I think that will even become more important in the future.
Yes. Absolutely, I think so. I mean, maybe also just like a story. I'm working in a startup which caters to very, very young people, like, you know, students. And I just remember one person, and they love TikTok, right? And I was like, why do you love this? This is so quick. Like, you know, how do you get anything with this? And then I asked her, do you think like YouTube videos seem boring to you? And I'm like, yeah, sometimes I think they could be quicker, you know? And I'm like, okay. Like
in the old days, it
crazy.
was, I like it, make it bigger. Now it's, I like it, make it shorter. It's
just
kind of changing.
It's quite, that's what like to add on Frederick's note, this is crazy how much the users change as they go younger or older. Like this is really increasingly becoming a challenge, that user is not a user. It's really like a young one or an old one. It's totally different.
There is one more question from our director, Rudolf. He's asking if it's working or is supposedly working with text blocks. We've seen this animation where Aliado is picking, let's say, chunks out of the information cloud and compiling them. When doctors formulate those reports, is Aliado already going to kick in, or is that happening purely manually, let's say?
So I would say there are two parts of that. The initial inputs, basically the data we would work right now with, if Aliado was to go into clinics by tomorrow, would still be quite unstructured data, which is the most complicated kind. And that's exactly why we designed this kind of feature where you could, as a surgeon, or as you would only have to curate those findings from Aliado. But the documentation that's afterwards created, that of course can all be structured. And that was also a really interesting field, I think, that we didn't have the time to look into deeper during the project, but there are talks about creating more structured and documented reports that follow certain building blocks or structures. And there are benefits, of course, to it, as there are losses as well. So that has to be, highly looked at or closely looked at, what also the surgeons want, because they're used to sometimes just dictate out of mind. I know some surgeons that, you know, they try to call up information from a patient all the way at the end of the day. And I can imagine, of course, that they maybe sometimes even don't want structure. They just want to put all their information right down there on a piece of paper or right into a documentation tool. And so having a building block where they have to basically build their own structure, that might be quite time intensive. But amazing, of course, would be if you would just automatically could create documentation. And that's sort of what we try to do a little bit with at least the documentation part, which you could see. But yeah, the short answer would be that it's still not fully structured when data comes in.
Because the actual documentation process itself is not standardized yet, right? It's a very personal thing for surgeons right now, or is there kind of a code?
So it really depends. It's not, so there are multiple factors, and I'm speaking as a non-expert here in that field, but as I found out, there are differences or there are standards when it comes to different houses or hospitals. So if you would look at the University Hospital in Heidelberg, they definitely have standardized reports for their clinics, for their houses. So everything that's basically for the University Hospital Heidelberg, that is standardized. But then if you would go maybe to the University Clinic in Tübingen or the University Clinic in Berlin, I'm not so sure if they are quite similar there, but I don't know if they're standardized or if they have some kind of treatments. And I also think it definitely comes down to what kind of document are we talking about. So if it's a physician's letter, basically one summarizing all the findings so far, I think mostly what we've seen is that they're still not standardized. They're still mostly written in fluent text. But of course, if you have something like a diagnosis brief where you just have the patient or where you give the patient a form to fill out some medical information, those are mostly standardized. There's just basic questions that you always ask: what's your blood pressure, what kind of medication do you take, and so on. So it really depends on the documentation and also on which university clusters do you look at, so to say.
So a cluster that has standardization would be a great starting point for actually making this AI-able, so to speak, for deep learning to get standardized input values, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, completely. Yeah, and there are pros and cons for that as well. Of course, it's great to implement technology, but from a practical perspective, it's also challenging because there are a lot of extra demands when you want to implement technology like that into bigger houses that, of course, are renowned and have a reputation already. And I think that's a whole other topic we didn't touch on today. But when it comes to startups in the medical field, I find that really fascinating because it really comes down to also lean development with a lot of documentation, even for the startups, because they have to document their development process in order for software to be allowed, right? So that's also really interesting, but I think that would blow the frame today.
I have another one to blow the frame today. It's Victor. It's Victor asking, do you consider let's say, simpler version for other medical fields that will be applicable using more common tech solutions, considering the difference between German medical systems and other countries? It is at sci-fi level. Well, Heidelberg is not Germany, but I know what he means.
Yeah. So basically, if I understood it correctly, if there could be a smaller version in the sense of that works in smaller houses and not
and also in less let's say less serious fields than oncology. I think that's what he implies.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So So I think one thing, I did have an interesting talk with a startup advisor, and he actually said, in order to train your AI model, why don't you first test it in a completely different industry sector? And that was sort of astounding for me. He said, like, why don't you test it, for example, in automotive factories with like bolts or so? I didn't know how to translate that. I'm not a data scientist or so. But I think that's maybe hardly comparable. And of course, there's a whole nother field of synthetical data that is becoming more and more bigger, to use data sets which are not real data, but are simulated data. I think, of course, at the end, if it's technology that's still being used in hospitals, it has to be a real patient data. And that is, still, I would say, a long way to, or from my experience, I would say something challenging, because the data that you have there has to be anonymized. The patient has to agree to it. Physicians have to look over it. You have to get a lot of documentation. There's an ethical committee that has to approve certain studies and also how the data is being used. And it's so much different, of course, for companies, for example, like Google, to just collect tons and millions of billions of data points each day for users using stuff like that commercially. So yeah, sorry, I went a long way here, but I think in conclusion, I think it would be possible and I think it would even not only be possible, but necessary to look at the smallest possible case for an MVP to start that off with. So we were even thinking about generating some of that data ourselves, just to see if we could train certain models off of that, and then to have like the curating model that you could see in the animation video, to have something like that work, just to see, okay, can they predict patients correctly through simulated data, and then you work from there. So definitely, in order to implement software like that, you have to start somewhere, and the best is, from what I've learned so far, the smallest possible case.
Okay, I think we have somebody enlisting or subscribing for a test run. Elizabeth Raucholz is saying, running pilot projects by accompanying individual doctors in 1 or 2 hospital systems could help develop the quality of documenting. Can we sign up for further development? Because the closer you are to the user, the better.
That sounds cool.
I would say have a look on LinkedIn and just tag Frederic later on and let him know. I think you should meet.
Definitely, sounds interesting. Thanks for letting me know. That's
so
cool.
If anybody other than Elizabeth Raucholz wants to sign up for a test run, go ahead. It will all be on LinkedIn later on, the full stream. In case there are no other questions at this point, I've run out of questions. Actually, I have one more. Has the UX Design Award, the New Talent Award, has it helped you? Like, has it been an aid in promotion, or have you been working with people you've now working with before? Has it promoted you in a way that really helped?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think especially just having it recognized, knowing that, you know, it's experts that looked over our project, and also really renowned people from different sectors look over our project and deem it worthy of such an award, was already a huge pleasure, or yeah, very exciting for us, because that's sort of course, a validation that we went down the right way. And maybe everything sounded a lot professional today, but at the end of the day, we were still students when we developed that project, and we're eager to learn. And we didn't even scratch the surface here on this really complex topic. But the UX Design Awards really helped us to, yeah, just know, wow, there's more behind this project than just yeah, what our team thought would be cool or maybe nice. And to be honest, right now, also this talk or the conversation we're having right now here, I find highly fascinating. So the talent track, or just having the opportunity to share with people that we won the UX Design Awards, is definitely a small validation for us. That's really, really helpful, or a big validation in that sense even. So it definitely absolutely helped.
It's good to hear. Good to hear that the feedback helps too. Thank you for coming tonight and yeah, answering all these questions. Yeah. If anybody has more, as I said, tag Frederic on LinkedIn. I hope we have the other team members on LinkedIn linked there too. So get in touch and make this project grow. Good luck with Jerry, definitely. I think we've had a long run here. I'll just leave you to your well-deserved Feierabend. The next event we'll have here in this kind of format is going to be on keypads for the building industry for rugged machines, the Series 09 rugged canned keypads, where product manager Stefan Hakuba walks us through the project, and award winner of the UX Design Award Public Choice. Sorry, not Public Choice, 21. And the current call status, that's the next thing that's going to happen. Oh, I'm lost. I lost the date. Oh no, come on. It's the 9th of February. Sorry, the 9th of February will be Stefan Hakuba on the rugged canned keypads. And the current call status is that we are open for public choice. So if you have favorite projects, tag them, vote for them, make them win, and see them on the next tracks here. thank you again for coming. You can also still browse the Aliado project on our website, of course. Under the winners, you can look for Aliado, and you'll find some beautiful illustrations from the project showing the interfaces. It was really nice to have you here. Fascinating project. And yeah, hope to see you again. Good luck with Jerry, definitely.
Thank you very much for having us. Well, it was a huge pleasure, and thank you for the great setup and conversation and introduction. It was really nice. Thanks a lot to you and the team.
Much obliged. Thanks a lot. Have a nice evening.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.